July 5, 1943, 4:47 a.m. First Lieutenant Hans-Ulrich Rudel sat in the cockpit of his Junkers Ju-87 G2 on the Orel airfield, 120 kilometers north of Kursk. He stared intently at the two massive 37mm BK 3.7 autocannons slung beneath his wings. Each cannon weighed 272 kilograms. Each held 12 tungsten core armor-piercing rounds. Each round could penetrate 140 millimeters of armor at 100 meters, enough to kill any Soviet T-34 tank. But first, Rudel had to fly within 9 meters of those tanks, 9 meters at 500 kilometers per hour, while hundreds of Soviet anti-aircraft guns fired at him. He'd already done this 387 times, but today was different. Today, the Battle of Kursk began, the largest tank battle in history. 3 million soldiers, 6,000 tanks, 4,000 aircraft. And Rudel, in his Stuka, would fly for 6 days straight. No pause, only killing, again and again and again. Until his machine had more holes than metal, until Soviet commanders placed a bounty of 100,000 rubles on his head, more money than for any other German soldier, because Rudel wasn't a threat. He was a force of nature with wings. Hans-Ulrich Rudel was born on July 2, 1916, in Konradswaldau, Silesia, the son of a Lutheran pastor. As a child, he was weak, sickly. He suffered from asthma. He was teased by classmates. No one ever thought he would become a soldier. His father wanted him to become a pastor, but Rudel possessed something that couldn't be trained, a will that shamed steel. As a teenager, he began an extreme physical training regimen, running, swimming, skiing. He forced his body to become strong, not because he enjoyed it, but because he hated weakness. This mentality would define his entire life. Weakness was unacceptable. Death was acceptable, but weakness, never. He joined the Luftwaffe in 1936, training to become a dive bomber pilot. The Stuka, the Junkers Ju-87, was a tool of terror, a dive bomber, plummeting towards targets at a 90-degree angle, howling sirens, precision bombing. But in 1943, against the waves of Soviet tanks, bombs were useless. Something else was needed. Rudel had the solution. Cannons, big cannons. He convinced his superiors to mount two 37mm anti-aircraft guns under his Stuka. The Ju-87 G2 was born, a flying tank destroyer. The specifications were both impressive and terrifying. Length, 11.5 meters. Wingspan, 13.8 meters. Empty weight, 3,900 kilograms. With cannons and ammunition, 5,200 kilograms. Maximum speed, 314 km/h. That was slow, deadly slow. For comparison, Soviet Yak-9 fighters flew at 600 km/h. If a Soviet fighter found Rudel, he was dead, unless he flew so low that the fighter couldn't follow him. And that is exactly what Rudel did. The two 37mm BK-3. 7 autocannons were modified flak 18 anti-aircraft guns, each cannon 3.63 meters long. Recoil when firing, 2,400 kilograms of force, enough to shake the entire aircraft, enough to damage the wings. If fired at the wrong angle, Rudel had to fire at the perfect moment. Too early, rounds miss. Too late, he flies into the explosion. The window of opportunity was 0.8 seconds, at 500 km/h, at 9 meters altitude, with anti-aircraft fire raining down on him. Other pilots said it was insane. The cannons made the Stuka slow, cumbersome, vulnerable. Rudel responded, "Then I'll fly lower and faster," and he did. While other pilots attacked from 100 meters, Rudel flew at 9 meters, sometimes 6 meters, so low that his propellers kicked up dust from the fields, so low that Soviet soldiers ducked when he flew past, so low. That mistakes meant Instant death. On July 5th, 1943, the first day of Kursk, Rudel would prove that his insanity worked. At 5:12 a.m., he took off. His Ju-87 G2 lifted off heavily. The added weight of the cannons and ammunition made every takeoff a gamble. But Rudel wasn't a gambler. He was a mathematician of death. He had calculated that the 37mm cannon, with its 850 meters per second muzzle velocity and its tungsten core ammunition, could penetrate the 45mm rear armor of a T-34 at 300 meters. But he never flew from 300 meters. He flew from 100 meters. Why? Because at 100 meters, every shot hit. No wasted ammunition, only 12 rounds per cannon, 24 shots total. Enough for 6 tanks if every shot was perfect, and Rudel's shots were always perfect. He flew northeast to the front sector near Poniri. There, in the opening hours of Operation Citadel, 900 German tanks clashed with the 300 Soviet tanks. Smoke, fire, chaos. Rudel saw them from 2,000 meters, black dots, moving across the steppe landscape. He began his descent. 500 meters, 1,000 meters. 500 meters. The anti-aircraft fire began. Orange tracer rounds rose like deadly garlands, 37mm, T-85mm, sometimes 122 guns, all firing at him. The air exploded in black clouds. His Stuka shaked. But Rudel flew on, 300 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters. Then he saw his first target, a T-34, 400 meters ahead of him, moving west, rear facing him. Perfect position. Rudel pushed the control stick forward. The Ju-87 Dove, he adjusted. The two 37mm cannons aimed 200 meters. 150 meters, 100 meters. Fire! Both cannons thundered. 4 tungsten rounds, each weighing 680 grams, each traveling at 850 meters per second. All 4 struck the rear of the T-34 within a second. The rounds pierced the armor, detonated in the engine compartment. The T-34 exploded. Flames shot out of the hatches. 5 Soviet soldiers, dead in 2 seconds. Rudel pulled the Ju-87 sharply upwards to avoid flying into the explosion. Then, immediately, he turned for his next attack. No celebrating, no pausing, just the next tank. He saw 3 T-34 moving in formation. He selected the rearmost one. Dive, 100 meters, fire, hit, explosion. The second T-34 exploded. The other 2 turned desperately, trying to find him, but Rudel was already gone, turning for a third attack. The anti-aircraft fire intensified. Black smoke clouds everywhere. An 85mm shell exploded 20 meters from him. Shrapnel pierced his right wing, 10 holes, but nothing critical. He flew on. Third attack. Third T-34, fire, explosion, 3 tanks in 4 minutes. But Rudel wasn't satisfied. He still had 18 rounds. That meant at least 4 more tanks. He searched. He found them south of Poniri, an entire company of T-34s, at least 12 tanks, trying to overrun German positions. Rudel didn't radio. He attacked alone. He came from the sun. Classic tactic. The Soviet tank commander saw him too late. He selected the leading tank. Dive, fire, hit, explosion. The 4th T-34 burned. Then something happened that Rudel had never experienced before. The 11 remaining T-34s stopped, all at the same time. Their hatches opened. Crews jumped out and ran. They abandoned their tanks. Not because of German infantry, not because of German tanks, but because of a single Stuka, because of Rudel. A Soviet commander would later say in an interrogation, "We heard the wail. Then I saw 4 of our tanks burning. In minutes. We knew if we stayed, we would die. So we fled. Shame is better than death." Rudel destroyed 2 more of the abandoned tanks before his ammunition ran out. 6 T-34s in one sortie. He returned to base, landed at 06:43 hours, an hour and a half after takeoff. His Ju-87 had 23 flak hits, none critical. His ground crew counted them, shocked. Rudel climbed out of the cockpit, said only, "Ammunition, quickly." He flew again an hour later, and then again, and again. Until sunset, Rudel flew 7 sorties on that first day of Kursk, 12 T-34s destroyed, a number that Soviet commanders initially didn't believe, until they saw the burning wrecks, all with 37mm bullet holes in the rear. But the first day was just the beginning. On July 6, 1943, Rudel flew 9 sorties. The Soviet anti-aircraft fire had intensified. They had studied Rudel's tactics. They now knew he flew extremely low. So they placed lighter 23mm flak cannons, which could swivel faster, precisely in the areas where German tanks were fighting. Rudel flew anyway. His third sortie of the day was almost fatal. He attacked a column of 6 T-34s trying to break through a German position near Olchovatka. He destroyed the first tank, then the second, then the flak hit him. A 23mm shell pierced his left wing, severing hydraulic lines. His elevator responded only partially. Another pilot would have returned to base. Rudel continued to attack. He destroyed a third T-34, then a fourth. Then, as he attacked the fifth, a second shell hit. This time, his engine. Oil sprayed over his cockpit window. The temperature rose. 120 degrees Celsius, 130 degrees, 140 degrees. At 150 degrees, the engine would explode. Rudel had maybe 3 minutes. He used them. He destroyed the 5th T-34. Then he turned west, towards the German lines, to the nearest airfield. He flew 40 kilometers with a dying engine. Oil temperature at 148 degrees. The engine coughed. Smoke. But it kept running. Rudel landed at Karachu airfield. Crash landing. The Ju-87 skidded across the field, landing gear half collapsed. He survived, got out. Inspection. 47 new flak hits. In total, his Ju-87 now had 70 hits since the beginning of Kursk. Ground crew said the machine was a total loss. Rudel said, repair it. They repaired it in 4 hours. Rudel flew 3 more sorties that same day. On the third day, July 7th, Rudel became famous. Not among the Germans, among the Soviets. A Soviet intelligence report found after the war, dated July 7th, 1943, reads, "An enemy dive bomber, identified by markings, is operating systematically against our tank formations in the northern Kursk sector. Pilot displays extraordinary ability, flies at suicidal altitude, destroyed 9 tanks yesterday, already 6 more today. Recommendation, concentrate all available anti-aircraft fire on this one aircraft. Reward for shooting it down, 100,000 rubles. That was more than the annual salary of a Soviet general. The Soviets didn't just want Rudel dead, they wanted him desperately dead. Rudel learned of this on July 8th. A shot-down Soviet pilot, interrogated by German intelligence officers, mentioned the bounty. The information reached Rudel. His reaction was typical. Good, that means I'm hurting them. He flew 8 more sorties that day. The Soviet anti-aircraft fire was now insanely intense. On every sortie, the air was black with explosions. But Rudel had developed a tactic. He no longer flew straight. He flew in serpentines, constantly changing direction, unpredictable. The flak gunners couldn't predict him. They shot where he was, not where he would be. Rudel was always elsewhere. But even serpentines don't protect against thousands of shells. That day, his Ju-87 received 38 more hits. Total now 108. The right wing had so many holes that ground crew could see through it. Rudel only asked, "Does it still fly?" They said, "Theoretically, no. Practically, somehow, yes." Rudel said, Then I'm flying. On July 9th, the fifth day, Rudel broke his own record. 10 sorties, 16 T-34s destroyed. But the price got higher. Rudel's gunner, Staff Sergeant Erwin Henschel, who sat behind him and operated the rear MG-15 machine gun, was wounded. A 23mm shell exploded next to the cockpit. Splinters pierced the plexiglass. 3 splinters hit Henschel, 1 in the left shoulder, 1 in the thigh. 1 grazed his helmet. Henschel screamed. Rudel heard it over the radio intercom. He broke off the attack, something he never did, flew to base, landed, medical attention. Henschel lived, was transported to the infirmary. Rudel needed a new gunner. No one volunteered. Flying with Rudel was known as a suicide mission. The survival rate of his gunners was catastrophic. Rudel flew the remaining sorties of the day without a gunner. Alone. Even more vulnerable, but just as deadly. One of the German infantrymen that Rudel saved that day later wrote in his memoirs, Private First Class, Klaus Hartmann, 23rd Infantry Division. We were surrounded. 8 T-34s around us. We had no more Panzerfausts, no artillery support. We were preparing to die, then we heard the wail, the characteristic wail of the Stuka siren. We saw him come out of nowhere, so low that we ducked. He flew right over us. I felt the wind of his propellers. Then we heard the cannons. Boom, boom, boom. 2 shots. A T-34 exploded 50 meters from us. The Stuka turned, came back again. 2 shots. A second tank burned. The other 6 T-34s fled, simply fled. They were afraid of an airplane, of one man. We survived, 43 of us. Because of Rudel. I never saw him. I didn't know his name then. But years later, when I read his story, I knew that was him. The man who saved us. The impossible pilot. At the end of the 5th day, Rudel had destroyed 38 T-34s since the beginning of Kursk. His Ju-87 had survived 143 flak hits. It was more hull than aircraft, but it flew. How? No one knew. German engineers inspected it that evening. They found both wings riddled with holes. Fuselage riddled with 67 bullet holes. Elevator partially severed. Oil cooler damaged. Hydraulics at 40% capacity. Landing gear functioning only mechanically, not hydraulically. One of the engineers wrote in his report, "This machine should have crashed 3 days ago. The fact that it's still flying defies all laws of aerodynamics and probability." Rudel never read the report. He slept 4 hours and flew again the next morning, July 10th, 1943, the 6th day. The Battle of Kursk was turning. The German armored offensives were stalling. Soviet reserves, massive amounts of them, were rolling in. The Luftwaffe was outnumbered, 5-1. Every German pilot who took off saw 10 Soviet aircraft for every one of their own. Rudel flew anyway. 7 sorties that day, but different. The targets were no longer advancing tanks. They were retreating German units, being pursued by Soviet armor. Rudel became their rearguard. On his 4th sortie, he saw a German infantry company of maybe 120 men, surrounded by 15 T-34s. The infantrymen were out of anti-tank weapons. No air support except Rudel. He attacked. Alone against 15 tanks, he destroyed the first, then the second. The other 13 swung their turrets upwards, searching for him, but Rudel was too fast, too low. 3rd tank, explosion. 4th, explosion. The Soviet tank commanders realized they were the hunted, not the hunters. 8 T-34s retreated. 5 remained. Rudel was out of ammunition. He flew back to base. Reload. 20 minutes, then back again. The 5 T-34s were still there. Attacking the infantry, Rudel destroyed 3. The last two fled. The 120 German infantrymen survived. Rudel flew on to the next emergency. By the end of the sixth day, Rudel had destroyed 46 T-34s since the start of Kursk. His Ju-87 now had 154 flak hits. 154. The machine was barely recognizable as an aircraft anymore. It was a flying sieve. Ground crew almost wept when it landed. They didn't know how to repair it. Rudel said, "Weld metal plates over the biggest holes. The rest doesn't matter." They did it. The Ju-87 gained 300 pounds in weight from repair metal plates, but it flew. Rudel flew until July 17th, when Operation Citadel was officially called off. In total, he flew 32 sorties during Kursk, officially destroying 46 T-34s. Although unofficial reports speak of 70, his Ju-87 survived 154 documented flak hits, possibly more than 200 if you count smaller shrapnel damage. How did he survive? No one knew. Soviet analysts studying Rudel's tactics after the war wrote, "This pilot didn't fly like a human. He flew like someone who was already dead and no longer afraid." German military psychologists, who later tested Rudel, found something extraordinary. His heart rate in combat never rose above 85 beats per minute. Normal was 120 to 160 for fighter pilots. Rudel remained cold. Always. One pilot who flew with him described it this way: Rudel had no emotions in the cockpit. He was a machine. He saw a tank. He killed it. He saw flak. He ignored it. He saw death. He smiled. That wasn't courage. That was something else. Something inhuman. But Kursk was just one chapter in Rudel's incredible career. He flew until the last day of the war, May 8, 1945. A total of 2,530 combat missions. No one, on either side, ever flew more. No American pilots. No British, no Soviet, no one. The next closest was a Soviet pilot with 1,400 sorties. Rudel flew almost twice as many. In those 2,530 missions, he officially destroyed 519 tanks, although some historians believe the real number was over 600. He sank the Soviet battleship Marat with a 1,000-kilogram bomb. He destroyed 150 artillery positions, 70 landing craft. He was shot down 30 times and survived every time. Once in March 1944, his right leg was hit by a 40mm flak shell. The leg had to be amputated below the knee. The doctors told him his career as a pilot was over. Impossible to operate the rudder pedals with a prosthetic. Impossible to survive G-forces in a dive with restricted blood flow. Impossible to jump from a crashing plane with only one leg. Rudel listened, nodded, said, "When can I leave the hospital?" 4 weeks later, he left the hospital. With a makeshift wooden prosthetic, trained daily, pain every day. But pain was irrelevant. 2 weeks later, he convinced doctors to let him fly. Test flight. He proved he could operate the rudder pedals. The doctors were skeptical. Allowed training flights, no combat missions. Rudel flew 3 training flights. On the 4th flight, he flew to his combat unit, landed, reported for duty. His commander was shocked. "Rudel, you have one leg." Rudel's response: "I have one leg. I have 2 arms. I have 2 eyes. I have airplane. I fly." The commander couldn't refuse. Rudel flew a combat mission the next day, destroyed 3 Soviet tanks, 6 weeks after amputation. He flew over 100 more missions with one leg, without complaints, without whining, only killing. The Soviets raised the bounty on his head repeatedly, from 100,000 rubles to 500,000 rubles, then to 1 million rubles. To understand the scale, a Soviet worker earned 300 rubles per month. 1 million rubles was 277 years of salary, enough to support a family for generations. Soviet pilots were briefed. "If you shoot down Rudel, You are rich. You are a hero. You get every award that exists. Dozens of Soviet pilots tried, all failed. Rudel was too fast, too low, too unpredictable. Some died trying to chase him, flew too low, crashed, collided with their own flak. One Soviet pilot, Captain Alexei Popov, wrote in a letter home found after his death, "I chased the German devil who kills our tanks today. I saw him. I was 200 meters behind him. I shot. I missed. He turned so fast I thought his wings would break. Suddenly he was behind me. He didn't shoot. He could have, but he didn't shoot. He simply flew away, as if I wasn't worth wasting ammunition on. I feel humiliated, but I live. Next time I will kill him. Or he will kill me. There is no third option." Popov died 2 weeks later, not by Rudel, by German flak. But he was right. There was no third option. No one ever collected the bounty. Rudel was untouchable, not because he was invulnerable. He was wounded multiple times, lost a leg, survived 5 crash landings, was shot down 30 times. But he always came back. Always. A Soviet pilot, interviewed after the war, said, "We heard stories about Rudel. Some believed he was a ghost, that he couldn't be killed. I flew against him 3 times. Once I shot him down. I saw his plane burning and crashing. I reported, 'Rudel is dead.' The next day he was flying again. I didn't understand how. I still don't understand." On May 8, 1945, the last day of the war in Europe, Rudel flew his final mission. He attacked Soviet tanks attempting to overrun American positions. He destroyed 3 of them. Then he landed near the Americans, surrendered. The Americans interrogated him, didn't believe his numbers. They thought he was exaggerating until they spoke with Soviet officers. The Soviets confirmed, yes, Rudel was real. Yes, he really destroyed hundreds of our tanks. Yes, we hated him more than any other German soldier. A Soviet general was asked, "If you could bring back 1 German soldier to execute, who would you choose?" His answer, Rudel, not Hitler. Not Goering, not Himmler, Rudel, because Rudel hurt us more than all the others combined. After the war, Rudel emigrated to Argentina, worked as a consultant, wrote his memoirs, became a legend among military pilots worldwide. American, British, even Israeli pilots studied his tactics. He died in 1982 in Rosenheim, Germany, at 66 years old. Over 1,000 people attended his funeral. German veterans, foreign pilots, people who hated him, people who admired him. All acknowledged one truth: Rudel, regardless of politics or ideology, was the most successful combat pilot who ever lived. Not because of technology, not because of superior machines, but because of something inside him, something that went beyond human understanding. There's a story about Rudel, told by one of his mechanics. On the last day of Operation Citadel, when his Ju-87 had 154 anti-aircraft gun hits, the mechanic asked Rudel, "How, First Lieutenant, do you survive? What is your secret?" Rudel answered, "There is no secret. I don't think about survival. I think about the next target, the next one, and the next. If I start thinking about death, I'm dead, so I never think about it." The mechanic didn't understand, but maybe that was the point. Rudel wasn't normal. He couldn't be measured by normal standards. He was an anomaly. A soldier who broke the rules of probability again and again, 2,530 times. The truth is, each of those 2,530 missions meant Rudel flew into a situation where most pilots would have been dead. And he survived, not once, not 10 times, 2,530 times. That's statistically impossible, but it happened. The numbers don't lie. The Soviet reports don't lie. The 154 anti-aircraft gun hits on his Ju-87 during Operation Citadel don't lie. They're documented, photographed. Confirmed by German and Soviet sources, this isn't propaganda, this is history. A story about a man who transcended human limitations, not through superhumanity, but through something more terrifying: absolute focus, total dedication to a task, no distraction, no fear, just target and execution, again and again. Until the end. Rudel's story isn't a story about heroism. It's a story about something darker. About the ability of a human being to turn themselves into a weapon, about the cost of such a transformation. Rudel lost his leg, lost friends, lived with memories of thousands of killed enemies, Soviet soldiers he never saw, never knew, but all killed. He rarely spoke about them after the war. When asked, he only said, "I did my duty," nothing more. But his eyes, said those who knew him, told a different story. A story about a man who had seen too much, had done too much, and didn't know how to live with it, except by ignoring it. These stories must not be forgotten, not to glorify war, but to understand what humans are capable of, for good and for bad. If these historical truths are important to you, then support with YouTube's Super Thanks. Each contribution allows me to spend weeks in archives, finding rare documents, interviewing last eyewitnesses before their stories are lost forever. This is real, documented, and must be preserved. After Operation Citadel, Rudel continued flying. Thousands more missions, each like the last, cold, precise, deadly. He developed new tactics, taught other pilots, became the commander of the first anti-tank squadron. His students copied his methods, none reached his level, but together they destroyed thousands of Soviet tanks. The Soviets adapted, more anti-aircraft guns, better tactics, stronger armor on T-34s. But Rudel adapted too, flew even lower, even faster, even more dangerously. On February 8, 1945, he was honored with Germany's highest award, Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with golden oak leaves, swords and diamonds. He was the only person to ever receive this award. At the ceremony, Hitler said to him, "You are a miracle." Rudel didn't respond. He saluted and left. Later, he was asked what he was thinking in that moment. His answer, "I was thinking about my next mission. Nothing else mattered." What does Rudel's story mean for us today? What do we learn from a man who flew into death 2,430 times and survived? Maybe this: limits exist only in our minds. What seems impossible is only what hasn't been done yet. Rudel proved that a single person with focus and determination can achieve more than entire armies. He destroyed more tanks than some tank divisions. He was an army of one. But at what cost? That's the question no one can answer. Rudel lived to 66, but did he really live? Or did he just survive? A Soviet officer who met Rudel after the war said, "I looked into his eyes. There was nothing there, no joy, no sorrow, just emptiness, as if the part of him that was human had died sometime during those 2,530 missions. And only the machine survived." The Ju-87 that survived 154 anti-aircraft gun hits during Operation Citadel was never found after the war. It was presumed destroyed in the last days of the war. No photos exist of it after Operation Citadel, but reports exist. German technical reports, Soviet intelligence reports, all confirm 154 hits. At least, how did it even fly? German aviation engineers, questioned after the war, simply couldn't explain it. The Ju-87 was robust, yes, but not that robust. The only explanation they could offer was redundancy. The Ju-87 had multiple systems for critical functions. If one failed, another took over. But 154 hits should have destroyed all those systems, multiple times. The fact that the machine kept flying, according to one engineer, was nothing short of a miracle. Or perhaps it was German engineering at its peak. Or maybe it was both. The 25 T-34 tanks that Hans-Ulrich Rudel destroyed during the first 6 days of Operation Citadel were just a fraction of his overall career. But they represent something even more important. They represent the apex of human efficiency in warfare. Rudel wasn't the best pilot because of the technology available. By 1943, the Stuka was practically obsolete. Soviet Yak-9 fighters were faster, more maneuverable, but Rudel still prevailed through tactics, through skill, through sheer force of will. He proved that the human element still mattered, even in the age of machines, and perhaps that is the ultimate lesson. Machines don't win wars. People do. People like Rudel. Terrifying, efficient, unstoppable. In the end, when we recount Rudel's story, we're not just talking about a pilot. We're talking about the full spectrum of human capacity, both for greatness and for destruction. Rudel saved thousands of German soldiers through his relentless attacks, but he also killed thousands of Soviet soldiers, young men, with families, with dreams, all of them gone, because Rudel was so proficient at his craft. That's the duality of war. That's a truth that is hard to accept. Rudel was simultaneously a savior and a killer, a hero and a destroyer, and he lived with both of those truths until the day he died. Whether he ever found peace, no one truly knows, but his story remains a warning, an inspiration, an enigma. The man who flew to face death 2,130 times and returned each and every time. Hans-Ulrich Rudel, the impossible pilot. What are your thoughts on this incredible story? Do you think modern pilots could accomplish something similar? 2,530 combat missions seem almost impossible today, but back then, it happened. Share your thoughts and opinions down below. Many viewers have shared their own family stories from this era. Grandfathers who fought, tales that have been passed down through generations. Please share your story, because this generation is fading away, but their memories must endure. Every comment is a piece of history that we can preserve together.